Okay, good morning, everyone. Right. Good morning. Yeah, that seems to be up and running. Okay, so we're looking at the subject of Ben Yisrael La'amim, which I was asked to cover, our relationship to the broader Gentile non-Jewish world. And last week, I think we sort of briefly summarized what it means to be a Jew. We're often tempted when we ask that question to give a sort of halachic answer, born from a Jewish mother, etc. That's an excellent halachic answer to the question. It tells us how we identify, but it doesn't get to the core of the question, what it means to be a Jew, what is a Jew, especially given that it's not just Shmiras Torah mitzvahs, it's not just keeping mitzvahs. It seems to be something in a sense existential or a definitional. And we said that what it means in the definitional sense is a bal bris. One is part of the full covenantal range of relationships that were created between Klal Yisrael and Hashem. The full range of covenants takes us all the way through to the end of Devarim, when we achieve a full national identity with the bris, the covenant of Arvus, of Klal Yisrael or even Zedazah, of mutual responsibility. And possibly at some stage earlier was already the status of Yisrael, whether it was the bris bein habasorim, or bris milah, the early covenants with Avram, or some later point. But basically what happens is there's an ongoing deepening and particularist covenant between a particular individual, family, or nation and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's what it means to be a Jew. That was part one. We also pointed out that all human beings have a covenantal relationship with Hashem, albeit not the Jewish covenant. This is the Midrashic Bris Adam covenant that Adam already had with Hashem. That's not explicit in the Torah, but the Midrash understands that Adam was born into a covenant with Hashem. And what is explicit in the Torah is the Bris Noach covenant with Noach, which is linked to the Shavuot Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. The final point that we touched upon, but deserves a little bit of spelling out, is the idea, the Mishna in Maseches Avos in Perek Gimel. The Mishna says, Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tselem, precious is man who is created b'tselem, chiba yasera nodasloi. It is a extra additional love that Hashem has made this known to human beings. Shenam, as the pasuk says, b'tselem l'kim asas Adam. Hashem made humans in tselem l'kim. Then the Mishnah carries on, Chavivin Yisrael shenikru bonim l'mokim. Precious are Yisrael, who are called bonim, children of Hashem. Chavivin Yisrael shenitzon hem kli chemda. Precious are Yisrael that were given the Torah. So what's unique about Klal Yisrael is the father-son relationship, the parent-child relationship, the kli chemda, the precious vehicle of the Torah. But what's not unique about Klal Yisrael is Tselem Elokim. Every human being is created in the image of Hashem. That's a pasuk, that's a Mishnah. So it's important when we're talking about the relationship between Jew and non-Jew, between the Jewish people and the rest of humanity, that this is an introduction. That this is obviously not what we're not what we're talking about. That other Maramakim, I guess I mentioned in this context, is the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, where the Mishnah says that Lama Adam lefichach nivra Adam yechidi. For this reason, a human being was created alone. And the Mishnah gives a number of midrashic reasons. In other words, the Mishnah is bothered by why is it that Adam was created as an individual. All other life forms were created as a species, Luminayam as a species. They weren't created as individuals. Why is it that Adam Harishon was created as an individual? And the Mishnah gives a number of answers. One answer is that Kolam Abid Nefesh Achas, whoever destroys one soul, is as if they destroyed the whole world. Whoever saves one soul is as if they destroyed the whole world. There's a machlokas, a debate there in the Girsaris, in the correct text of that Mishnah, whether it's Nefesh Mi Yisrael, or Nefesh doesn't refer to Nefesh Mi Yisrael, a Jewish soul, or anyone. But certainly when it gets to the next part of the Mishnah, it's referring to all humanity. It says, Mipnei Shalom Habriyas, in order to ensure there is peace between creatures, so that no person can turn to their fellow human being and say, Abba, Gadol, Mimach, my father, my ancestor is greater than your ancestor. And as all humans are created from one Adam Rishon, so basically a cry against the possibility of racism or elitism or anything of the sort. Aristocrats can't claim they have blue blood in their veins. Different races can't look at each other and say we are born from different stock to you. Ultimately, we all come from one parent. So that's the Mishna there in Sanhedrin. So these are sort of sources in Chazal when we look at the individual personal relationship between human and human. As much as in a few moments we're going to look at the philosophical and ashkafic and theological divide because of the gift of Torah and the relationship of monotheism to polytheism and to paganism and various other things, it's important to start off stressing the sort of individual that we're talking about. On an individual level, we're not distinguishing between human and human. The Mishnah, I mentioned also, I think last time, the Mishnah in Sanhedrin of Kol Yisrael Yeshul Mechele U'Kol and the diuk, the inference of the Tiferes Yisrael, because the Mishnah there lists exceptions, and it lists as an exception Bilom, which seems to understand that the default setting is that non-Jews have a portion in the world to come. We also discussed, I think, the view of the Rambam, who speaks about a non-Jew who keeps the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach as being from Chasidei Umos Olam and having a portion of the world to come. So these are important when we're talking about individuals. We will either still this week or next week speak about relating to belief systems or faiths. When we're talking on an individual level, these are the important Maramakomis really to stress. So what else can we say about the individual halachic status of a non-Jew? So basically, there's three categories in halacha, three categories in halacha. There is a non-Jew who has not accepted mitzvahs b'nei Noach at all. There is a ben Noach who has accepted, who hasn't formally accepted the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, but in practice is keeping them. And there is a ger toishav who has undergone a type of semi-gerus in which there's been a formal acceptance of the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, albeit not become a ger tzedek. In other words, they haven't accepted the Taryag mitzvahs, they haven't joined Klal Yisrael. Translation of joining Klal Yisrael is accepting the whole of Taryag mitzvahs and becoming part of the people, the nation of Klal Yisrael, or to put it in the terminology we were using last week, to enter into the unique bris, the unique covenant of Klal Yisrael with Hashem. This is explicit in Hilchos Geirus, in which Hilchos Geirus is modelled on the way that we as a people entered into the bris, the covenant. Similarly, Geirus is the individual process of someone entering into a covenant. However, there's the option of a ger toishav. A ger toishav is someone who also needs to do this in front of Beis Din, but in front of Beis Din accepts the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, and therefore has the status of a ger toishav. The Rambam, as we mentioned, perhaps creates a sort of subdivision within someone who's keeping the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, and seems to make this chiluk between, it depends on the texts in the Rambam, between someone who is from Chasidei Umos Olam, because they accept the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, because it was given to Moshe on Sinai, and someone who is not me Chasidei Umos Olam, because they accept the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, but out of seichel or reason, rather than it was given to Hashem at Sinai, to Moshe at Sinai. And I think we discussed this when we spoke about our hypothetical Mongolian goat head scenario, the issue of fairness in the world and what to make of people that have no access to the insights of the Torah. I think I mentioned last week briefly, there are two texts or two versions in the Rambam, whether the Rambam says that someone who accepts the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, not because it was given to Moshe on Sinai, has the status of chachomeha, or is the Rambam saying that only someone who accepts it because it was given to Moshe at Sinai is chasidel and chachomer? Or he's saying there's two levels. There's chasidel, the pious ones who accept it because it's given to Moshe at Sinai, and chachomer, the wise ones who accept it because out of reason and seichel. So just to summarize what we've said so far, we said on an individual level, Tzelem Elokim, Chelek in Olam Haba, a person created alone. Every human on planet Earth, no human can turn to another human and say, Abba Gadol mi avicha, my father is greater than yours. Every human is created with Tzelem Elokim. Once it comes to matters of theology, however, we have a scale of options, as it were. You have a member of Klal Yisrael, then you have someone who is a ger toishav, who's accepted the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, formally in front of Beis Din, undergone a Geirus conversion type procedure. Then you have someone who is in practice keeping the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei even if it hasn't been accepted. And then you have someone who has no connection to the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei at all. And the Rambam seems to say that there's a distinction between someone who accepts them because they were given to Moshe on Sinai, in which case they are Chosid and a Chacham, or someone who hasn't, who just keeps them but not because they're given to Moshe on Sinai, in which case they are either neither a Chosid nor a Chacham, or perhaps a Chacham, a wise person, or not a Chosid. That's a summary, I think, of the halachic landscape as it exists. Are we allowed to force the observance of Torah on people? And the answer is no, as we well know, we're not allowed to force the observance of Torah on people. Are we allowed to force the observance of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach? So the Rambam's view, at least, seems to be as follows. The Rambam's view seems to be that we do not need to seek out the peoples of the world and force conversion of the Sheva Mitzvahs in Noach. The Rambam also seems to understand that this is a condition of citizenship in Eretz Yisrael. So when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, he seems to understand that Jew and non-Jew can be a citizen in Eretz Yisrael. However, there's a basic acceptance of a code of conduct, which is the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. So this is akin to, in a sense, any modern state. If someone wishes to become a citizen of the state, they have to accept the laws of the land. The laws of Eretz Yisrael are not the Torah, the Torah Mitzvahs. These are the laws of Klal Yisrael, of the Jewish people. However, the laws of the land, in a sense, are Sheva Mitzvahs in Noach. So Rambam is of the view that in order to be allowed to stay in Eretz Yisrael, one has to accept the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. The Rambam also has an interesting view with respect to Molec. So we know that the mitzvah of Mechias Molec demands the destruction of Molec. And perhaps every year as we get to Parshas Zohar, one wonders a bit about this Parsha. And I think on other occasions we've spoken about the morality of this Parsha, exactly what to make of morally difficult things in the Torah. What's this idea of destruction of a nation? The Rambam has a view on this matter. And the Rambam says the point of Molec is simply that this is the one nation which we can't let live unless they accept the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. So it's the only nation that you can force on them the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. If Molec accepts the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, of course we wouldn't destroy them. Why would we destroy an Amaleki who's accepted not to kill, accepted not to steal, accepted to set up din, accepted basic morality in relationships and so on? Why would we kill such an Amaleki? So the Rambam is of the view that the difference between Molec and the rest of the world is we have no mitzvah to seek out the rest of the world and force people to accept the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. If they wish to live in Eretz Yisrael, then they have to accept our constitution. They have to accept the basic structure of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. Molec is the one exception. Molec seek out because they're dangerous. They are so fundamentally and intrinsically and existentially opposed to any values whatsoever that they present a menace. There's danger. But if an Amaleki accepts Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, and that's it. They've separated themselves off from being part of that sort of cult of death and murder which Molec was, and therefore that Geirus would be acceptable. So the Rambam's view is that Ger Toshav status helps Molec, and therefore, in a sense, the whole exceptionalism of Molec is simply this is the one people where we would seek out and say your society is so corroded and corrupted and destroyed that you have to accept Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. It's too dangerous to leave you without accepting it. Yes. No, God forbid, Chas v'Shalom. We don't have we don't know who Molec is. There's very interesting. So first, on a practical level, we don't have an application of Molec. There is a Masorah that went through the. So let me just give you a little bit of background since you're asking about Molec and the practical level of it. So we no longer know how to identify the ancient nations. We don't know who Ammon is, or Moav is, or Amalek, or Mitzri, which has halachic ramifications. For example, the Torah says, Ammoni v'lo Ammonis, right? Someone from Ammon we're not allowed to marry, Moavi v'lo Moavis. We don't have a way to identify them. Why don't we have a way to identify them? Because of historical circumstances, basically the Assyrian exile, Sancherev, Bilbel, so almost Sancherev had a policy of moving people from their original locations, and the sort of nations of biblical times have become blurred since then. Now, what are we to make of all of this? So, there are a number of ways of understanding the halachic consequence of this. It is possible, and the Rambam seems to imply this at least in the context of the nations of Canaan, the 7 Canaanite nations, that this is not meant to be viewed as a biological or genetic identity. It's meant to be viewed as a national or cultural identity. In other words, if you have a Frenchman who chooses to join Canaan, and that becomes their nationality, then they would be included in the halachas of Canaan. And if a Canaanite decides to move to Italy and become an Italian, then they wouldn't be included in the halachas. So it's a national or cultural identity. It's an ummah. It's being part of an ummah. That's how the Torah defines it. It's being part of an ummah. An ummah, normally speaking, so in the ancient world, is what the culture you were born into and that you grew up and became part of. But there's the rare individual who travels or opts out to become part of a different culture, a different nation. This is a national identity. So why would the 7 Canaanite nations have this national identity? Again, because their national culture was one that was irrevocably and irreversibly opposed to us, and therefore there was a danger and a menace. But if someone leaves that national identity, they wouldn't be part of this. Ammon and Moab seems to be not like that. Ammon and Moab seems to be a sort of biological or matter of descent, halachic status. But this is simply the halacha of Ammon is the law of marriage, in which case somewhere amongst the world these individuals exist, and we rely on the normal rules of Rov and Safek and so on, the majority and doubt and situations doubt and so on to resolve the halachic consequences of this. When it comes to Molec, there's a very old Masorah, and this is past 2 generations, that views Molec also as, in a sense, a cultural identity, in which case different peoples can adopt the mantle of Molec at different times in history if they become irrevocably and irreversibly opposed to any basic level of morality. This is not referring to the average Chas v'sholom. This is not referring to the average non-believer or pagan or anything like that. In the times of the giving of the Torah, there are plenty of pagans around. None of them had the halachic status of Molec. In the times of Chazal, there were plenty of atheists around. Maybe in the times of the Torah, there weren't atheists. There were Ozav Zara, those who didn't believe. In the times of Chazal, there were plenty of atheists around. None of them had the halachic status of Molec. Molec was this irreversible embrace of death and destruction and hatred. So, for example, in the war, there was a general consensus that Germany had adopted the mantle of Molec. That wasn't a claim that Germany were descendants of Molec in a halachic or literal sense, saying that the nation or the people or the culture or the society had adopted the mantle of Molec. Rav Gussman, who was a Gaon and a Talmud Chacham and a Dayan in Vilna before the war, and after the war went on to found a yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, and so on, had a very interesting and difficult war years. He became a partisan in the war, and in his time as a partisan, he killed German soldiers. That's what he was doing. He was fighting, and he considered that fighting a Nazi is a mitzvah of Mechilas Molec. This was the view he adopted. Rav Soloveitchik, of Yoshua Soloveitchik, the Rav, speaks about this has an essay around an article around the subject, where he's speaking about the morality of Mechilas Molec, and he argues that it's a societal or cultural adoption of a certain lifestyle. So there's a number of ways of looking at this. But Halacha l'maaseh, either way, the Rambam is of the view, and then Halacha l'maaseh, the Rambam is of the view that a Moleki who adopts Shavuot mitzvahs in Norach has left the status of Molec. Sorry, John.
So it sounds to me that this is a bit like what we would say in German is a gestalt, or maybe a form that floats around in history, and that people tend.
Yes, if you want, if you want to use the language of classic philosophy, where they make this distinction between matter and form. So yes, this is a form. This is a concept which settles on sadly and tragically settles on different groups at different times in history. That's one way of understanding it. Whether this is meant midrashically or technically halachically is not entirely clear. But there are those who present this as literally a halachic idea. In other words, they understand that Molec is a concept. The Rambam doesn't seem to understand it like that. The Rambam does seem to understand it's referring to particular people. But the Rambam says that you can opt out of that peoplehood status simply by being a ger tosha. So to summarize, in general, we certainly don't force adoption of Tariag mitzvahs, of people of entering the bris, the covenant with the Jewish people. We don't, though possibly we may, but we certainly are not mechuyev, obligated to enforce ger tosha status. However, meaning we don't have to hunt out a nation in the Far East and say, you have to become a Ger Toshov, even though we passionately believe that those are basic values for all human beings. However, to live in Eretz Yisrael, according to the Rambam, one needs to be a Ger Toshov, and a Molec is the one exception where the only way they can shake off their status of a Molec because of the menace and danger is to accept and show mitzvahs and enough.
Famously, the kind of Sonnenfeld wouldn't go out in 1898 when Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany went to
Yes. Yes.
Because he had it on his tradition from the Vilna Gaon, and that must seem Vilna was the 18th century.
Yes.
So they must have had a view that it wasn't just a current adoption of these cat culture, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It was something inherent.
It's very difficult to know what to make of Masora's Baal Peh. And don't forget that there had been a time of a golden age of Jewish presence in Germany. Don't forget, by that stage in history, there was already philosophies floating around which made it a center of anti-Semitism in a very profound way. So it's very difficult to know what this Masora meant and whether it was an adoption of what exactly are the defining features of when a nation assumes the mantle of Amalek and what exactly the Masora from the Vilna Gaon was. So you're correct, but it's difficult to know exactly what to make of this Masora. I don't think anyone would say that Germany today is considered having any halachic status because it's not a hotbed. I mean, like all countries in the world, it has like all countries in the world, it has its problems with anti-Semitism. But I'm not aware of any sort of I don't think as far as I know, there's no statistical evidence or cultural evidence that has a deeper, sort of more profound relationship to anti-Semitism than other societies. I don't know. I mean, one would need to research. I don't know any place it could even dream of saying that that there's in the war of Gusman. It's just an interesting thing that he considered himself. I believe, even though this needs to be checked. I believe he held that one would make the bracha of Mechias Amalek if as a partisan in the war, whether he had the time to do a l'shem yichud and Zobin or not at that moment. I'm obviously speaking about it's sort of joking about very deep and dark experiences. Yeah. But as a concept, it's just an interesting thing that again, these oral statements are very hard to know exactly what to make of them. But apparently, he considered at that time in history this to be a fulfillment of Mechias Amalek to do such a thing. Okay, so this is in terms of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Now, what are the halachic ramifications of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach? Why do we need to know about them? They're psukim in the Torah, first of all. I'm not going to go through how the Gemara is dorish. They are droshas in the Gemara. In other words, there's no explicit pasuk that says thou shalt and then lists Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. The Gemara is dorish. The Gemara derives in the normal manner of how the Gemara derives halachas. It derives the concept of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and these are irrelevant halachically. How are these relevant halachically? First of all, just to understand what the obligations of non-Jews are. Secondly, perhaps to encourage keeping of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. In other words, even though we have no obligation to enforce it, nonetheless, clearly it is a good thing and one that one would want to encourage. And there may be there's the halachas of Ger Toshov. If we wish to accept a Ger Toshov, there's a machlokas whether the concept of Ger Toshov applies and can be assumed today or not. Certainly, people can accept upon themselves the Sheva Mitzvahs in Noach, and I think there's a Noachide movement out there of people who have accepted the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach themselves, but whether they can achieve the formal status of Ger Toshov or not is a matter of dispute. Is this a halacha that only applies when we have Rov Yeshvei Olah, we have the majority of Jews living in Eretz Yisrael, where we have the Yovel back or not? So there may be halachic links between the Yovel and the halachic status of Ger Toshov, maybe not. So this is somewhat a machlokas, but certainly there's a possibility of the concept of Ger Toshov. There is a Masorah. Again, I'm not sure if this is found in his forum or not. Maybe I should have looked into this earlier. The Rambam, as I said, says that we only accept a Ger Toshov in the time when the Yovel applies. The Rambam doesn't believe that Ger Toshav status can be assumed. Other poskim argue there is a Masorah, and maybe he writes about this in one of his forum, the Chidah, Rabbi Chaim Yitzchak David Azulai, who explored the world. He was a traveler. The Chidah was really Anha Gaonim. He was. One has to be careful not to distinguish between different rabbinic grades. But there's no doubt that in history there have been certain figures have been exceptionally influential. So if we think, for example, in the Ashkenazi Masorah, you have the Vilna Gaon you mentioned beforehand. I'm talking about the era of the Achronim, right? You have the Vilna Gaon, the Chasam Sofer maybe. These are the two figures that had influence on. Sorry, Maral not. No, definitely not. Maybe it's a separate share about the role of Maral, but very briefly. If you look in, so let's go first of all in Halacha and then in Ashkafa. So if you look in halachic literature, the Maral is quoted here and there, but not a significant halachist, not a significant halachic influence. If you look in the influence of the Maral, let's talk about Maral on another occasion. It's a very, very interesting figure what the role of the Maral is. Again, I don't want to get caught up in we're talking about titans, we're talking about giants over here. And certainly if you listed 20, 30 most influential Achronim in the Ashkenazi world, let's say, certainly they would appear. If you look in the form of Jewish life as we have it today, what molds what it means to be sort of an Orthodox Ashkenazi Jew in Orthodox halachic practice, there's no doubt that Chasam Sofer and the Vilna Gaon are the two most influential individuals. That's not to say, if we talk about the Baal Shem Tov, right? I'm missing out the Baal Shem Tov over here. Clearly he was formative, but when you look in the halachic system, there's certain individuals to highlight. I actually want to backpedal, particularly as I'm speaking here in being recorded. I want to emphasize, I don't want to get into the subject of who's bigger and that's not our conversation over here. I'm just saying there are figures who are particularly formative and influential, and maybe one day I'll give a share on the Maral and just explain what his place was because it's a very interesting place in history. But in the Sephardi world, certainly Chidah was that figure. The influence of Chidah on Halacha was massive. However, the Chidah had a very difficult life. The Chidah was a representative of the Yerushalayim, the Jerusalem community, and he traveled around the world fundraising. That was what he had to spend a large part of his life doing. And like other great figures, he made something positive out of the negative, and he was very, very influential in bringing the Torah of the Sephardim to the Ashkenazim, the Torah of the Ashkenazim to the Sephardim, and sort of reuniting Jewish conversations around things. He wrote a sort of small encyclopedia called Shem HaGedolim, in which he listed all the Gedolim in the traditions and all the traditions, and played a very important part in that. He also was very, very important in bringing to light a lot of manuscripts that had been lost and ensuring that they were preserved and were able to be reprinted. As he traveled around, he ended up in little towns and villages across North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. And he found in some, isolated place that the Rav of the town had a Ksav Yad, a manuscript of a Ritva on a Masechta that no one else was really publicizing, and he would publicize it. He also found variant manuscripts between these different locations and compared them. The Chidah had a very good critical eye for textual incongruities and the like, and he noticed, for example, he was the first one to bring to light that the Ritva on some Masechta, which was traditionally ascribed to the Ritva, doesn't look like the writing style of the Ritva when you look at it, and probably came from someone else. Very, very important figure in lots of these things. I mentioned it simply to say that the Chidah met in his travels a non-Jewish scholar of Judaism. This was quite common in the medieval era and all the way through to the Victorian era. Non-Jews who had a very good knowledge and a vast knowledge of Judaism. In the bibliothèque, in the Central Library in Paris, where he went to find manuscripts. And according to the story, again, I'm not sure if this is brought in the works of the Chatar, maybe it is, maybe someone can tell me if it is. According to tradition, he was Magaya, this individual, as a Ger Toshav. So he arranged a basement to accept him as a Ger Toshav. So these things do still go on. The most recent public example of a Ger Toshav, I believe, is the Rabbanut in Israel. So let me just explain the halachic background to this. So we were just talking a few minutes ago before the show about the Heter Mechira. So the Heter Mechira is a solution created in the early time of the Yishuv HaChadosh, the new settlement of the land of Israel, due to a fear that the creation of agricultural communities would be impossible if Shemitah was kept. And there was a halachic device in which the land was sold to a non-Jew for the year of Shemitah, thus, according to most opinions, removing from it the halachic status of Shemitah. And it remains a matter of debate until today. Now, there's many questions that were posed on the concept of heter mechira and many solutions that were given to these questions. I'm not going to go now to the halachic debate about it, but one of the issues is there is a law, a prohibition in the Torah of los chonim to sell part of the land of Israel, to sell land in Israel, to sell fields in Israel to pagans, to those who don't have citizenship right in Eretz Israel. Now, who has citizenship right in Eretz Israel? Halachically, only a ger toshav. The issue of los chonim doesn't apply to ger toshav. You can sell land to a ger toshav, but not to someone else. So the rabbinut in Eretz Israel, I think already, not this Shemitah, but one Shemitah back, are always looking to improve the heter mechira and to try and remove as many of the potential pitfalls, halachic pitfalls in it. And one of the halachic pitfalls is you're not allowed to sell land in Eretz Israel, which not only means that the arranging of the heter mechira is problematic, but possibly invalidates the whole heter mechira, because the whole heter mechira is built through shlichus, agency. You don't have each and every individual farmer selling their lands. They appoint the rabbanut to sell the land to them. And there's a concept of ein shliach lidvar avera. You can't appoint an agent to do a crime, to effect a transaction which is forbidden. So if one isn't allowed to sell the land in Eretz Israel, not only is the Rav who is arranging the mechira transgressing a law, but it invalidates the whole sale itself because it's done through an agent. So the rabbanut was Magaya. Did this sort of ger toshav type gerus, this acceptance of the Sheva Mitzvah. I believe they found either an Arab or a Russian, I'm not sure, who wasn't interested in becoming Jewish, but was a believer in Hashem, Yari Shemaim, had fear of heaven, and wanted a spiritual life, but had no interest in becoming Jewish, but was happy and willing to accept the Sheva Mitzvah B'nei. And they were Magaya, this individual. He took upon himself this commitment in front of Beis Din and was given the status of a ger toshav. Thus, according to those who argue on the Rambam and believe that one can create a ger toshav nowadays, removing the problem of los chonim, of selling land, in this case vast swathes of Eretz as in the heter mechira to this individual. So ger toshav still floats around a little bit nowadays as a sort of minimal halachic construct. So these are some of the reasons why we need to know about the Sheva Mitzvah B'nei in order to understand the application of halacha to a ger toshav and how that works. Now, there is one final very important halachic ramification in understanding the Sheva Mitzvah B'nei, which is the idea of lifnei iver lo sitin mechshol. In front of a blind person, one isn't allowed to put a stumbling block, which Chazal understands it to be metaphorical or conceptual rather than literal or just literal. In other words, this pasuk doesn't just refer to putting a stumbling block in front of a literally blind person, but also means being complicit in enabling and facilitating someone transgressing an avera. Now, this doesn't just apply to causing a Jew to transgress, but also applies to causing a non-Jew to transgress. So one isn't allowed to put a stumbling block in front of any human being. You shouldn't put stumbling blocks in front of blind Jews or non-Jews, obviously. There are mitzvahs in the Torah which only apply in even relationship mitzvahs, which are only obligations to other Jews. Mitzvahs which are considered beyond basic morality. But if lifnei iver lo sitin mechshol applies to every human being, we're not allowed to chas v'shalom cause any human being to stumble. So it is important for one to be conscious and aware of this, at least on a minimal level. So let me give you an example. You can work as a Deliveroo driver or as a chef. There may be other issues around this, but at least in principle, you can market and sell within certain parameters non-kosher food or deliver non-kosher food to non-Jews. There isn't an issue with that. Most non-kosher foods we're not allowed to eat, but we're allowed to benefit from. So you can sell and you don't have a problem with it. However, there are some non-kosher foods which we're not allowed to even benefit from, primarily chometz on Pesach and basar b'cholov, where you can't benefit from them. Okay, but what about Avim and Hachai production? So it depends on I don't think Avim and Hachai is a common practice, but I believe there are cuisines which take meat off off living animals, and this would get one into the issue of besides the cruelty involved in it, the tsar b'aleichem, which is obviously a problem, even just delivering it would get one into a halachic shaila about lifnei iver lo sitin mechshol in this context. I had a very interesting shot a while back. It was not asked to me, it was asked to a colleague, a friend of mine who then consulted me. I think I spoke about it on a Friday night in Shul in my halachic segment because I found it so interesting. This is a lady who worked as a secretary or PA in a particular company. And one day her boss was off work and her boss called her up in the middle of the day and said, I need you to do me a favor. Apparently he was off work because it was a significant pagan festival. He was a member of, I'm not going to talk about particular faiths, member of a faith which is generally assumed, not Christianity, a faith that's generally assumed to be pagan. And she wanted this, he said to secretary or PA, please can you take, I forgot a bag in the office. Please can you take this bag, which contains, I think, incense or various offerings that this individual wants to bring, get in a taxi and bring it around to my temple. I'll wait outside at the door and pick it up from you and take it. Now, this is very, very interesting and rare halachic question of Lifnei Iver, Lo Sitin Michshol, in the context of Avodah Zarah. So Avodah Zarah is a prohibition for, it is included in idol pagan worship, is in the Shem Mitzvah. So this would be included in the prohibition of Shem Mitzvah. No. So, okay, so it's a good question. There are two sugyas that are relevant to this. There is the Gemara in Sanhedrin which tells us that they removed the temptation, the burning temptation for Avodah Zarah, and it's a subject for shir in its own right, but from the beginning of the era of the Second Temple, we do find that Avodah Zarah ceases to be a Jewish challenge. You don't find much challenge around Avodah Zarah. It's interesting, the whole of the first Beis Hamikdash era, Avodah Zarah is the challenge. Second Beis Hamikdash era, that's not the challenge. And the Gemara, there's a mystical Gemara that speaks about the Anshe Knesset Gdolah cancelling the temptation, the Yitzhara for Avodah Zarah, which is reflecting this historical fact. This is, by the way, why I mentioned, when you asked about the status of Molec, I said in the pre-Second Temple era, there were always pagans floating around Avodah Zarah. In the Second Temple era and onwards, there were atheists floating around. In the first Beis Hamikdash era, you don't find atheism as a challenge. No one was an atheist. You either believed in Hashem or you believed in Avodah Zarah. In the Second Temple era, Avodah Zarah no longer is a challenge, but very materialistic or secular or atheistic beliefs begin surfacing under the influence of Greek philosophy. So there's this at the same time rise in history. You have the rise of Greek philosophy and the negation of Yetzirah Avodah Zarah. So that is true that at least for Jews and in that part of the world, the burning urge for Avodah Zarah ceased. Having said that, nonetheless, there are many people who are Ovdei Avodah Zarah. Then you have the Gemara, which says, Minhag, yeah, excellent. I looked at you for this because I know you're a Shasiyid. Minhag Aviseim Yodeim. Minhag Aviseim Yodeim. The Gemara really says it's more than just the Tosfos. That it's that practice of Avodah Zarah is minhag aviseim yodeim. It's going through the motions, the rituals, without much of a heartfelt connection to it. Nonetheless, in practice, if someone is bowing down to Avodah Zarah, is burning incense to Avodah Zarah, in Halacha that is a Ma'aseh Avodah Zarah. There's no doubt that's the act of Avodah Zarah. The ramifications of these Gemaras may be around presumption of Avodah Zarah. Whether we need to be as worried about Avodah Zarah as we, an assumption of it. There's discussion, for example, there's two reasons for the prohibition of Yain Nesach. Oh, sorry, not Yain Nesach. Yain Nesach is wine used in pagan worship, libation offerings, wine used as a libation offering. So that is Takrovas Avodah Zarah, that's certainly forbidden. But what about Stam Yainon, wine which has just been touched or moved, but we have no evidence it's been used for Avodah Zarah. So there's two reasons for the prohibition of that. The first reason is because there's still a fear that it's been used to Avodah Zarah. The second reason is Mishum Chasnus. Wine is a drink that's drunk when one is, by definition, has an alcoholic content. It's a time of deep connection, a wine party, and so on. The Chazal didn't want there to be wine parties in order to avoid intermarriage and assimilation and so on. And therefore, there's a prohibition around that. Now, the nafkamina, the distinction between the two reasons, is that if it's linked to Avodah Zarah, it's forbidden to benefit from it. If it's just mishum chasnus, because of assimilation reasons, then one is allowed to benefit from the wine. One can't drink it. It's forbidden to eat or drink, but not to benefit from it. So the poskim discuss whether the Issa Hana would still apply in a world in which Avodah Zarah doesn't exist. So, for example, in the Muslim world, which is certainly completely removed from Avodah Zarah, maybe there'd be reason to reduce the prohibition to an Issa of drinking, but not an Issa of Hana. It may be in the Christian world less so, where wine is still used as part of services. And that's again a lack of discussion. In practice, we rule that l'chatchila, in the first instance, one should not benefit from non-kosher wine. And therefore, one shouldn't go out and buy a bottle of non-kosher wine to give to a colleague. However, once it's a situation of loss, for example, you've already been given a bottle of non-kosher wine, you can give it on as a gift to a neighbor or to a friend, even though you're benefiting from it, because we are lenient around benefit in our relatively post-pagan world. But none of that is of relevance to this to a question when we know that someone is setting out to do Avodah Zarah. Sorry. Okay. So we get to. I don't want to spend too long talking about Lifnei, but I'll just mention in the concluding minutes of the shir, maybe just speak very briefly since we're talking about Halacha L'Maisa. As I said, Sheva Mitzvahs and Nunach are relevant Halacha L'Maisa with respect to Lifnei Iver. So just very briefly, there are two different types of scenario where one is enabling or facilitating sin in another. And the Gemara refers to these scenarios as Trei Ivra Danara and Chad Ivra Danara, two sides of a river or one side of a river. So scenario number one is where we're on two sides of a river and someone asks me, can you throw across the river this piece of pork or whatever it may be? So in that case, you are enabling the sin. Without you, the sin can't happen. This is the prohibition of Lifnei Iver Lo Sitein Bishal. You're enabling the sin. Situation number two is Chad Ivra Danara, one side of the river, where the sin can happen whether you pass it or not. You are simply assisting in the transgression rather than enabling the transgression. In that situation, the prohibition is Messiah, that of assisting rather than causing the avera. The sinner can get the food no matter what you do, and you're simply facilitating it or assisting in it rather than making it possible. So in this situation, this is a different prohibition. It's the prohibition of Messiah. This prohibition is either Drabanon or Deraisa, connected to Cheach. We should give rebuke to someone who is sinning. If you're obligated to give rebuke to someone who's sinning, then you can't assist in their sin. So this is the prohibition of Messiah. The prohibition of Messiah only applies to Jews. And we're not obligated, as we said, to give rebuke to a non-Jew. Pasuk says, you should give rebuke to your fellow, in other words, a member of Klal Yisrael. You don't have to go around telling everyone off in the world. So the prohibition of Messiah is understood generally to apply to Jews, not to non-Jews. In other words, I'm not allowed to enable a sin. That's a terrible thing. I'm putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person. However, if someone is determined anyway to sin and they can achieve it themselves, I'm simply making it a little more convenient, then this prohibition wouldn't apply. So it would seem in this taxi case, at the end of the day, you can send someone else, you can send the courier over to get it, you can go over himself and get it, just doesn't wish to do so, in which case it would be a Messiah, an assisting, rather than Lifnei Iver, an enabling. Nonetheless, it's clearly not a pleasant task to have to engage with others, and there may be others sort of floating around this, but that's how we would deal with the issue of Lifnei Iver. So I simply point out, given that I was asked to give a share about our Ben Yisrael Amim, about our relations to the non-Jewish world, it's important to mention that there are halachic responsibilities that we have with respect to Sheva Mitzvah Nach, even though we don't have an obligation to go and force it on people, and we don't have a mitzvah of Cheach Techiach, you don't have to stand at street corners rebuking those who are not keeping the Sheva Mitzvah Nach. Nonetheless, we have some degree of mutual responsibility to all human beings. Yeah. Yeah, so it seems to me that this would be Messiah and not Lifnei Iver. That's what I said to my colleague who asked me. Nonetheless, it is clearly appropriate if there's any, to squirm out of this field, because it's clearly something that's far from.
If you had a consideration of taking a job, to be put in that position, that should have come into the melting pot before one even took the job.
Yeah, there are other issues over here. If one has a job which is primarily or significantly involved in work with things which are Asa B'Hana, and these incidents are certainly Asa B'Hana, then Lifnei Iver on Messiah's side, there are problems over here. the definition, the halachic definition of this is called rotza b'kiyumai, that when you work with something and you want it to exist and you have responsibility for it, then you are maintaining the existence of something which is asmana. So if one sees an advert in the newspaper to be an incense deliverer to temples, it certainly would be also to take this, even though it may not be nifnei. But in this case, her primary job was being a PA. It was a once in her whole career moment where her boss asked her to do something, and probably technically and legally she can say no. I mean, he's asking a favor of her, and she can say it's not my contract, I'm not obligated to do it. Nonetheless, in a normal working relationship, if your boss asks a PA to do something or secretary to do something, she'll do it, or he'll do it. Yeah. You are allowed, because you're not facilitating the avera in any way at all. You're just running the accounts and the business for them. Okay, so we'll stop here for today. There's no share next week. I'm away this week in Poland. I'm going out to Poland with the school, and then we'll resume the week after that. And the week after that, I want to look both from a halachic and philosophical angle, because in a way I've been evading the issue till now. Because the person who asked me this question, I just believe when you do a topic, you should do it thoroughly, which is why I'm starting from here. The person who asked me the question really didn't want to know about the halachas of Shavuot mitzvahs in Iraq. I want to know what we're really thinking, what philosophically and hashkafically, theologically is our relationship to paganism or to other faith systems. Is it possible there's a truth value to it? How does halacha view these things? So I refuse to speak about a topic without trying to do it holistically, and therefore I've wanted to start off by speaking about individuals and Salam and Akim, then moving on to the Shavuot mitzvahs in Iraq. I would like next time we speak to touch a little bit more on a couple of other halachic matters around relationship, but then I'm not going to evade the subject further, and I will get to the core issue of what's really the relation, how we meant to view a world in which 8 billion individuals have beliefs very other than ours. So I will get back to that. So, yeah, Avram. So in my final sheets, that I sort of put together, I've quite a bit around Rabbi Sachs and dignity of difference, and we will discuss that. And I realised that the person asked me that this was their interest. I don't think it's. I think in the interest of a share, this is a share in intellectual honesty. If I was giving a one-off share, in some series, whatever, I would have just dealt with that. But I just want to try and this forum, for me at least, is one where we deal properly with the sugya holistically. So, yeah.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.